So now we have Andy doing a presentation on the science of vitality. Andy's been one of the head guys at the BSA for many years, and he was the director of principles into, I think you found saying there, untenable, didn't you?
I'm not sure if I left them or they left me. Yeah.
So can we have a big warm welcome for Andy Cotton, please?
Is this working?
No. You need to speak into this.
Oh, speak into this.
Yeah, sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome everyone. Thanks very much to the ICO for inviting me to talk. I think I'd just like to take a moment just to have a look at the birds on the... Now, life is a very difficult thing to get your head around, isn't it? And being a therapist, you can study all the science and you can do all the courses, but when you're touching somebody, there's something a bit more ethereal goes on, a bit more mystical, as if there's something you just can't quite sense, but it's there, and you know it's there. I want to try to get to you, across to you today, how those feelings of connection and oneness with the patient have a basis in science, what that science is, and what little John meant when he was talking about rhythm. We have the 3 R's, don't we? Rhythm, routine, and rotation. Rhythm is something that little John coined as a term when he noticed that everything in the body went in waves. We go to sleep and we wake. We're fertile and then we're not fertile. The government rises and the government falls, eventually.
Thank God.
Yeah, and so everything you can imagine is a product of these waves. And little John noticed this. And the idea was that if you could somehow insert yourself into the wave, feel its characteristics, and then adjust it, then you will literally be involved in the process of health of that person. And you will feel somewhere inside you that this is the right thing to do, and you will do it and they will feel better. And there's a kind of closed loop, a therapeutic loop. So I want to start off with just understand what life is in its very sort of basic molecular, cellular sense. I've got a lovely little video here. I want you to just have a look. This is what molecules look like when DNA is being copied. All this stuff happens at the speed that you're seeing it. And all these little things flipping backwards and forwards, and I think it's just like some sort of interesting dance, you know. It's like, how on earth, oh, this is great. Have a look from top left, you'll see a little thing come down here. That's vitamin D. Vitamin D wanders in, and it turns the whole thing on like that. And then something else comes on. And then RNA comes out of a little machine that wanders down the DNA. It's really quite unbelievable. How did it ever end up doing this? How long did it take for natural selection to get to this? You can't even quite comprehend it until you realise that life on this planet is 2,500 million years old. And every year will be billions of experiments. Is this better or is this worse? Now here, have a look at this. These are the bases flipping themselves in, building the RNA, and then that's the speed at which it runs in your cell. It's, you know, I don't know, it's hard to get your head around really, but now it has to run at this speed. Oh, I'll just carry on. So, from this conception of under the bonnet, all this was going on, little John wrote that what we call vital force, what we call the sort of mystical principle, is actually all this stuff going on in the bonnet, under the bonnet, and he was fully convinced that one day we would understand all of this. If we talked about God or we talked about other things, it was only because that was like a holding metaphor for the things we didn't understand. And he was very clear that it was all scientific, it was all evidence-based. And as time goes on, science finds more and more evidence to support osteopathy. I've never ever come across an example of where science refuted osteopathy. And I'll get across to you a little bit later why that's true. So he said, and this is so prescient, he was such a genius, every organ of the body is possessed of a special motor of its own. So complex and marvellous is the control, it extends to every molecule, as we saw in that previous, that rhythm and that it's all organised, it's all dancing. So complex and marvellous is the control, it extends to every molecule. The body is made up of myriads of free, independent, active organisms in closest communication with one central unity. And that reminds me of those birds, multitudes of free organisms. And when you realise how we were built over time, you realise that must be true. It started with a cell, and then it became a multitude of cells, and then organs, nervous systems. But each time there was a layer of complexity, the previous mechanisms had already been built. There wasn't a need to reinvent DNA. There wasn't a need to reinvent circulation. All these things started early, and we just built layers on top of them. So it started with rhythmicity at the very beginning. The very, very first thing will have been something opening and closing. So this is how you control this fabulous system. If you stretch the DNA in one cell all the way out, it would be 2 meters long. And all the DNA in all of your cells put together would be twice the diameter of the solar system. Now that takes a bit of getting your head around, and it makes you realise why it has to churn out that DNA so quickly from those little machines. This is a cell. Now I love watching this. If you watch, waves start within it, and then they just sort of bounce around, don't they? Can you see? The more you look, the more you see. It's like whoosh, whoosh. A little final little glimpse at the top. Now the speed of this wave, if you have a look at it, you can see it's defined by the size of the object and the elasticity of the envelope and the viscosity of the interior. Once you have those three, then what you have is a little engine, or even more interestingly, a little clock. All you have to do is start it in one place, and this thing will go around and go around, and it gives you the ability to time things. Once you have the ability to time things, then you have rhythm. And once you have rhythm, then things as they build one upon another, the top things build themselves upon the rhythms of the lower things, such that their rhythms are additive. So when you breathe, your breathing rhythm, as it comes in and out, pumps things through your liver, and inside the liver there will be a rhythm of the liver's own, but the breathing and the walking and the rhythm of the liver itself and every single cell will all have been built over all of that time, all of them to be harmonious and additive. So therefore when you walk, you pump your liver. You can't avoid it. And in fact, I've developed something called Andy's Law. Right? Andy's Law is, if you see something working, you have to ask yourself, could there be a better way of working? So you see something in the body and you think, could it work better? And the answer is no, it couldn't work better. This is the result of millions and billions and trillions of experiments over 2,500 billion years old. So whatever we have in us is the product of all those experiments. And whatever you see working must be the best it could have got. There's no improving it. So this is a little bit more subtle but worth looking. Wherever you look on this beautiful video, everything is just sort of humming and pumping, and can you see wherever you look on it, the things are just kind of throbbing and opening and closing with ripples and shimmers passing over the whole thing. This is very reminiscent of the starlings, where the starlings were shimmering and rippling. It's the same thing with cells. Cells have these waves that pass through them. Now, what you don't necessarily get taught about the physiology of cells is that, I'll go back, is that inside a cell is not liquid. Inside a cell is a gel, cytoplasm, which is a very small amount of protein with water bound to that gel. It's been developed over time so critically that if you pass a wave through that gel, it turns to liquid as the wave passes through it. If you wanted to, you could have some sort of molecule that was able to latch on to that wave passing through the cell, and you could move things across the cell. In that little wave, as the wave passes across, a movement, at that wave front it turns to liquid, it picks up a molecule and it'll put it across the cell for you. And as we've seen, these things are rhythmic. So you can have something that moves across, and then this triggers something else, and so you have like a little machine, a little timing machine based around the size and the waves. So that means that these waves are really, really, really important for our health. The whole cellular mechanism is based upon the rhythmicity of these waves. And the whole concept of osteopathic health is that if these waves are interrupted, then health is interrupted. If your breathing is interrupted, then because these mechanisms are built upon one another, then the mechanisms within every single liver cell will be broken because they will no longer be in harmony with the wave that's supposed to be there. Which means that when you walk and when you cry and all of these things are all deliberately built to massage cells. Make them alive, literally. And if they're not alive, how do you make them more alive as an osteopath? But what you do is you work with bodies for years and years and years until you can feel, oh, that's better. And very often the person will sigh, won't they? Or they'll get warm or something. And if you're lucky, you'll feel something in yourself change, and you'll change, and they'll change, and you'll both come out of it kind of improved. And it will say to you, well, maybe because it hurt in my head, that's where his problem is. It's interesting then looking at that thing, and then you find something. And you do that again and again until you realise there's some sort of communication going on between the two of you, a rhythmic communication. Now, this rhythmic sense I believe to be a fundamental human sense. I've already added the sense of time because we have clocks inside us. Once you have a clock, then you know what the time is. We also have a rhythmic sense because once you join to a patient, you become like those starlings. Those starlings know what the others are doing, and you form a greater whole. So you think to yourself, this doesn't feel very nice, this feels a bit stuck, this feels a bit dry, whatever it is, and you think to yourself, I need to get this moving, I need to twist this, I need to rotate this. You apply all your mechanics and all of your theory, but the upshot of it is that it feels nicer afterwards. Now that feeling niceness, that's not your imagination. That's you being part of a wider whole. Just like the way that women's monthly cycles harmonise when they're together in a group. So your cycle will harmonise with the patient. So therefore what's in your mind affects your rhythm, and therefore what's in your mind affects your rhythm, affects their rhythm. But also you can feel their rhythm back. Are they feeling scared? Are they feeling injured? You will feel these things very directly because the rhythms communicate to us. Because the rhythms and the emotion are the same thing. Because the emotion projects upon the body. So these these rhythms, and pumps, they exist in every single dimension. They exist in electricity, they exist in fluids, they exist in behaviour. I want to show you a very interesting little video where, when I just run it, this is wires with electrons running through the wires. And a guy has taken 20 metres of wire, and every single couple of inches he's put a little probe on it so he can measure how the electrons move down the wire. So what happens? And then at one point it splits into two, like that. Can you see now? Now whoops, that's the wrong way to go. And I want you to imagine at that point that it's splitting, it's the aorta coming down, and it splits into the iliac vessels. This movement of electrons is an analogue for what happens in that process. Here it goes. And each peak is a peak of voltage as the electrons pass down the wire. I'm afraid I couldn't get the sound to work, sorry. But what's really interesting is what happens here. Now, one of the wires is connected to nothing. And one of the wires flows out into a sink. So on one wire, it hits a buffer. The electrons come to the end and they all pile up, and the voltage spikes up. Now imagine this, as an analogue, this is the common iliac vessel with vasomotor tone in one leg because of an L lumbar spine problem. Then what will happen is you'll get a peak of pressure. But look what happens if we run it further. Watch where that wave goes then. I'll keep doing that. So let's bring it further along. Sorry if I'm being a bit ham-fisted. There it goes, comes in. And then it hits the buffer, or it flows out, but then it goes backwards as another wave. And then that goes all the way back. So you get this kind of rippling backwards and forwards of these waves of electrons. Now imagine, why does it keep doing that? Imagine instead of being electrons hitting a buffer and flowing back, imagine that's pressure in one of your arteries. And then that pressure wave comes back to your heart. And what if that pressure wave hits a peak just where the heart is ejecting blood? You will have to increase your cardiac output, won't you? Because you won't be ejecting any blood. Imagine if the reverse is true. Imagine if you have a sink where all the blood is pouring out, but then what happens, if you watch the video, we scroll forwards, here, a negative wave propagates back. So it hits the end with the open, but then negative pressure passes back down all the way to the end. So if you had a system where you could open your blood vessels at just the right point that you pass a negative wave back up your artery, then when the heart is pumping, it will hit a negative wave and you can pump blood out using less heart force or just eject more blood. Now, so this means that if the body was to make things easy for itself, it would be able to control that vasomotor tone, wouldn't it? Such that it knows how long it takes for a pulse to get to the extremity. It knows when to inject a lowered vasomotor tone into the extremity at just the right point that it's going to bounce back and suck blood out of the heart again. Now imagine this works with every single cell and every single organ and every single thing that you do. all these rhythms are balanced against each other to make it as easy for the body as it could possibly be. And if it works this way, if you see it working, it must be for a very good reason. We just haven't necessarily figured it out yet. And then he does the same thing with, I'll just carry on here. And this is just showing, maybe I won't do this, a bit further forward. Yeah, we go. So this is the wave front, passing up, hitting the end, flipping up to high pressure, but then bouncing back again. So here he does it with water instead. I love these sort of geeky people. So he pours liquid in, which is the equivalent of a battery in this system. And then he compares what happens when you let water through a system and you let electrons through a wire. And you can see it's exactly the same. The principles are fundamental to the way everything works. This is why little John was able to say so confidently, rhythms underlie all life. He called it vibratility. Now what happens when one of these waves that I've suggested must improve cellular function? Because if cellular function would be helped by a wave, then the wave will be there. So watch what happens when a wave hits the bottom left corner of this cell. If you have a look at the bottom left, you'll see little spikes, and the spikes are black. What happens to that's sort of inclusions on the surface of the cell. Watch what happens to those as a wave hits the cell. There it goes. See all that black? It's blasted into the cell. Any viscosity or surface effects are overcome. Any inertia is overcome. And that is cellular transport in a sticky medium. It turns it to liquid, propels it across the cell, uprating cellular transport by orders of magnitude. Now that's got to be helpful, isn't it? So therefore those waves have got to be there. This is the same, bottom right this time. You can see every now and again a little wave comes along, flips all those little vesicles up. Can you see? Now these cells are shown in isolation, but of course they don't exist in isolation, do they? They exist in a body of cells. So therefore this cell would normally be next to another cell, and these would be operating with waves passing through them. And so that body of cells will have a rhythm of its own, specifically to create these flipping waves to drive everything through it. The whole thing is carefully built to maximize the physiology. Here we see a body of cells being injured, ripped apart, and now you can see they're both moving independently of each other. And then the movement pushes them back together every now and again, and then, it doesn't pull apart anymore. The movement has healed the injury, and now it's thinking about it, and there's things happening at a molecular level, very ancient mechanisms of tissue repair. Then the whole thing goes kind of a bit weird and wobbly, and occasionally it goes still. This stillness is analogous to the still point in cranial work. And then all of a sudden, you can see it rhythmically, it's trying to start up again. And all of a sudden you see stuff passing from left to right as a wave. Can you see that? There it is. All of a sudden the wave flows across. Now, if you have any fixed size object and you pass a wave through it, that wave will excite some things and others. As the wave bounces backwards and forwards, the waves will either cancel out or add. So if we put different notes into a violin, you can see there. Now, you can't hear, but there's a musical note playing. And wherever you can see darkness on the back, that's where nothing's moving. And where it's light, that's where everything's been bounced around. Which means that if you think about it, if you then change to a different note, you get a different pattern. Now that means that if you wanted to, you could have a change of note passing through a cell, and you could move stuff wherever the hell you wanted, depending upon where those nodes and internodes were. So you could have backwards and forwards, you could have it into a point and then leave it there, just by changing the, if you like, the music of the cell. And in fact, I believe that when we listen to music, this is exactly what we're doing to ourselves. We're putting rhythmic wave fronts through our body that actually becomes a greater whole, healing us. And in many ways, that's analogous to an osteopathic treatment. You're intervening in someone's rhythm and you're making it more musical. And all it has to do is feel nice to work, because you've got this sense in you about what's nice and what's not. That has to be useful for something or it wouldn't be there. So, here we have the gorgeous Henry. And if you imagine these two are becoming a greater whole, and Henry is assessing the needs of its partner, and the two of them, let's go back and watch that rhythm again, this bit. Here, sensing, micro-adjusting, but all the time encouraging, being nice to it, because it feels like that's what it needs. If you look at the movement of a guitar string, you'll see that it doesn't move because it's got constrained ends, like a smooth. It hits the end and then bounces off and whips. This is that power that drives that stuff through the cell. The power of life. So you can add music to a cell and whip up all of that physiology, or you can treat them such that there are no blockages to motion, and then all of these rhythms start to work together again, instead of being separate and perhaps cancelling each other out. So this is very interesting. I read this paper, and they were looking at arterial pressure waves. And they were trying to find out where these arterial pressure waves came from. And they discovered that every single segment of the spinal cord had multiple oscillators, in fact, little clocks. And these little clocks were feeding an organ from the diagram we know from Middlejohn. So these little clocks are sending pulses of vasomotor, as we've seen from the other thing, to pull blood or fluid in and out of the cell. And these clocks are nested. So there's the breathing clock, the heart clock, the vasomotor clock. And they knew this was true because these vasomotor, so-called Mayer waves, persistence of these waves following high cervical transection in vagotomized multilocular decerebrate animals would seem to suggest spinal sympathetic microcircuit oscillators generate these waves, i.e. they cut the animal's head off. And these waves still existed, which is why they started to look for them in the spinal cord. Everybody before that thought they came from the brain. Now something does come from the brain, but there's also nested oscillators in the spinal cord. And there are also nested physical oscillators within each organ. Remember that cell where it was the waves were bouncing around? inside the breathing wave enters the liver, and the wave will bounce around inside, and there'll be just one perfect wave that really gets the breathing and the heart and the liver all together. And that is when it feels nice once you've treated somebody. It is exactly the same thing. So all you have to do is do your mechanics and listen to the body and adjust the system, and all of these waves will start to work together instead of opposition. And this is the vitality, this is the health that comes out of. I think we can probably skip that. This is measuring. They measured all of this. So if you look at the top trace, can you see it says 30-second interval? So this is blood pressure and sympathetic nervous system activity. Can you see that sympathetic nervous system activity has a 30-second wave in it? You're not taught about this, are you? Throughout the body, all the time, there are low-frequency waves. Now, why would there be these low-frequency waves flowing through the body? Again, very, very reminiscent of the cranial mechanism. And the cranial mechanism is very interesting because no people feel it the same. In fact, when they try to measure two different people feeling the same cranial mechanism, they will disagree with each other. And this has been used to say, well, it can't be anything there, can it? Because there's no inter-rater reliability. But what's happening is that one person's rhythm is touching a person, and another person's rhythm is touching a person, and now you've got a three-way rhythm going on, and you would never expect those people to feel the same thing. If they did feel the same thing, there'd be something wrong with the experiment. So what happens is there's a master and slave relationship. This means that there are like greater waves and lesser waves. Autonomo respiratory coupling in intra-neuraxially extent sympathetic related and parasympathetic related interneuronal microcircuit oscillators. That means that they found that breathing coded the local oscillators. So the local oscillators in the spine were changed by the breathing. If you change the breathing rate, then the oscillation rate in all of the different nodes would change. But of course the reverse is true. If you relax somebody's breathing by getting their ribs to move, then the wave of the breathing slows down. And that goes to all of those little oscillators, to all of those organs. And all of a sudden it's in sync with the organ and the cells rather than not in sync. And again, you have an answer as to why people feel better, why healing comes from. You've uprated the physiology in those cells by orders of magnitude by making a lung move better, and the rhythm changes. Okay. This is what I always get at work. The printer doesn't work, right? If it doesn't work, try and turning it off and then back on again. There's lots of evidence that the body does this all the time. It like gets itself all in a state, and then it goes, oh, I don't know what I was worried about. That means built into us are resets for our system. And the reset, the higher the level of the function, the more the reset works. So people that do yoga talk all the time about breath of life, don't they? You can reset yourself. You can bring life to the body through the breathing. And that's because there's coupling between the breathing and the lower order rhythms. All of these things are system resets for the body. Laughing, sighing, yawning, CV4, inebriation, and sharp afferent events out of sensory bounds. Now, with the CV4, you may have heard of the interesting experiment they did, where I don't know how the hell they did it, but they took some rats with, they took a bunch of rats, a whole load of rats, and half of them they treated with a CV4, which is where you stop the rhythm in the head by visualizing it and stopping it and letting it start again. And they did this again and again and again and again. And then they cut the brains of the rats up much, much later, and they saw that the rats that had had the CV4 had no evidence of Alzheimer's. And what was happening was the CV4 was stopping the head, restarting it, and then this was whipping through those cells and displacing all those amyloid plaques. And it makes you think all of a sudden, what do we have here, you know? What power does an osteopathic treatment have? If you can take something from stuck to moving, if you can go from nothing to 1,000%, this is very serious. When I say sharp afferent events out of sensory bounds.
Now on this side, the angle of thrust is different. It was here before, between the ischium here and the spine here, spinal process here.
So he couples with it.
Forward and drop a little.
Drop, couples,
And there it
rocks,
is. There it is. Quite
couples
easy.
and
on the rock.
Sharp event.
All movements are made on the move,
All movements.
not from a standing start.
So that means that he's joined with it. And he's not adjusted an object, he's adjusted a process. You can't adjust a process by taking it apart. You can only adjust a process by joining with it and listening to it, and then adjusting it, nudging it, asking it. What they very famously say in classical work, appealing to it. Appealing to it could only work if you can read it, it can read you, and you can read it, and you can talk to each other through the mechanism of appeal. Like, come on, you feel, and the thing will, if you think it, it will read it. So this is, Little John's great vision. The great central fact of life is motivity, and the fundamental basis of life so far, as our objective life is concerned, is vibratility. This was, I don't know when, 1905. There was no electron microscopes. There was nothing, there was none of that. They didn't know anything about any of it. And that he recognised that it must be to do with vibratility. And he reasoned this because he knew that if you imposed conscious vibratility onto the system changed. I.e., if you wanted to change a rhythm, you had to become rhythm yourself. A rhythm can only change a rhythm. So he sensed that I can feel this rhythm, the body changes when I just change the rhythm. There must be some basis of rhythm in the underlying physiological processes. There must be, because it's the same language. So here, still, the osteopath finds here the field in which he can dwell forever. His duties as a philosopher admonish him that life and matter can be united, and that union cannot continue without any hindrance to free and absolute motion. So, from what I've told you about all of these nested oscillators and nested fields of vibration and fluids washing through cells, we must be able to feel this, because we have a vibratory sense, and we also have a sense of right and wrong about that sense. That must be a real sense as well, the osteopathic rightness sense. Otherwise we wouldn't feel those things, and the person wouldn't respond to that. And there's very interesting experiments done with intention. So you can be thinking something and not actually doing anything, and you can see physiological changes from the different intentions you have just from your thought. And there's other very, very interesting work when I've just been talking mostly about fluids, but this also applies to electrical fields. Would the body work better if it could share communication with another human electrically? Would that be good? Now you have to say probably yes, it would be good, because we come from age-old systems where they were connected, and it would be good to have instantaneous communication. This is why you can get waves passing through fields of starlings or through organs, because there's an electrical connection as well. Would it be good if we could couple with that electrical field and help our fellow cell, i.e. our fellow patient? Sometimes with osteopaths you feel heat, don't you? You feel warmth. You feel something going on, All of these systems are yet to be discovered, but they're real. They're absolutely real, because would it be better if they were there? And the answer to that is yes. And if it would be better, then they must be there, because we've had millions of years to get better, develop those systems. So when you do a body adjustment in the classical approach, because you have this rhythmic integrity, a unity, trouble anywhere in the body, anywhere, could set up aberrations in these vibratory fields. So if you want to get the health of a heart good, or a wrist, Mr. Werner would always complain when he was treating a wrist, he would get him to get undressed because he started with the foot every single time. It's like, you start furthest away. And that's because you're treating the rhythmic integrity of the person, because every single individual part is a physiological, rhythmic individual nested within its organ, nested within its oscillatory system, and nested within the whole. And because with that violin back, you couldn't tell where those stasis points were going to be, where things would get stuck. So therefore you can't know what's affecting your iliac fossa with congestion following appendicitis. It might very well be that by doing something to the neck or doing something to the vagus nerve. But what you do know is that if you treat the whole thing and you leave it all better, you must have got to those systems. Because if it feels better, then it's working better, because otherwise you wouldn't feel it. So this means that our work is just unbelievably profound, right? It's like the counterpoint to the medical model. It's like finding all the chaos, finding all the distortion, finding all the emotional triggers, finding all the stuckness, all the twists, and through recognizing that it's not right, easing them out, balancing, finding harmony in the body, and that harmony will propagate out as waves of delicious life and health. In summary, the body and our greater lives are inherently rhythmic. The coherence of that rhythm can be sensed and judged. The osteopathic sense of does it feel right or not. The rhythms respond to sensory appeal through mindful coupling. The unity of the body can be progressively restored. Okay, thanks very much everyone.